state region. So basically we're looking at 2 rounds of severe weather. And the first round of severe weather is most likely going to be affecting portions of the Florida Panhandle and southeast Alabama. That threat's mostly going to be happening in very late tonight and in the pre-dawn hours, and especially south of I-10. So those coastal areas of the Panhandle, that's where we definitely have that greater area of concern, at least for round 1. And that's going to be tonight into daybreak on Tuesday. And we'll show some radar model animations too to give you guys an idea on what's going to happen later. And then the round 2 is going to be the very intense and powerful squall line, and it's going to move through the region after daybreak on Tuesday. This is the primary area of severe weather that we're worried about across much of the tri-state region. And the big thing we want folks to keep an eye on, we really don't want folks to pay attention, or we don't want folks to put too much attention on if it's an enhanced, which is the orange shading in a lot of the outlooks you see, or if it's going to be moderate, which is the red. The thing is, there's going to be little difference in impacts between the enhanced risk we're advertising and, if it does happen in the future, a moderate risk. The impacts are going to be very similar, so you're getting caught up on the wrong thing if you focus too much on those categories. It's a serious, severe weather situation as the main line moves through, and even some of this stuff tonight. Again, all severe hazards are going to be possible, but some of the rounds of severe weather will bring a greater possibility of one hazard or the other. So again, all hazards are possible with widespread destructive thunderstorm wind gusts, possibly in excess of 70 miles per hour. We'll kind of get into what is driving that in a little bit. And we could also see several tornadoes, including the possibility of a few strong tornadoes. And what National Weather Service considers strong is a tornado that's EF2 or higher. And we also have the possibility of some hail. What are some other hazards we're going to pay attention to? It's going to be the non-thunderstorm winds, and these are winds that are going to be arriving ahead of the squall line. Those could be up to sustained winds, 30 or 40 miles per hour, with wind gusts up to possibly a 50 or 60. We'll get more in detail of that in this briefing. And also we're going to see life-threatening beach and marine conditions with minor to moderate coastal flooding possible. Now, with how cold the water is, not really. I'd hope no one's in the water with how cold it is this time of year. But some people do love to go in the water. But this is not going to be the time with this severe weather. You're not going to want to be in the water at all. It's life-threatening. And we're also going to see about the possibility of pockets of flash flooding. So, what kind of impacts could this see? Well, we could see numerous to widespread power outages. That's the big thing we're worried about. There's also the possibility of scattered to widespread tree damage, with trees getting felled by the strong winds, or because of how wet of a pattern we've been in, the trees being able to fall down a lot more easily with these strong winds. And the beach erosion and minor river flooding, that's also what we're expecting. So, all right, let's get into the first round of severe weather. That's going to be happening mostly around and after midnight tonight. So you can see here in this graphic, this is from the Storm Prediction Center, and basically what it's highlighting is where the area of concern is going to be tonight. So you can see in that orange area, that's what we call an enhanced, that is level 3 of 5. And basically that is where we see the greatest possibility of severe weather in the overnight hours. And you can see for lots of the Florida Big Bend and Southwest Georgia, that concern isn't really going to be there in the overnight hours, but it's still not a bad idea to make sure you have your phone on so you can get alerts in the overnight hours, just in case the forecast pans out a little different than we're thinking. So what can we see in those enhanced areas, or even in the slight areas? Well, we could see isolated to scattered severe storms in the Florida Panhandle and southeast Alabama tonight. Again, that's the enhanced risk level 3 of 5. What kind of hazards can we expect in this? Well, we could see 60 to 70 mile per hour thunderstorm wind gusts. Now, with this first round of severe weather on the warm, it's basically going to be concentrated along and south of a warm front. That's where the low-level shear is going to be greatest. That's where we could see possibly a little bit better tornado potential as that warm front lifts north. Because basically north of the warm front, it's going to be a little hard to get those damaging winds. But as soon as that warm front lifts north and we get into the more warm and unstable air, that's when we're going to see that possibility for the damaging winds also increase in that severe risk tonight. And we could see some hail possibly. We can't rule that out. Now, wintertime is where we don't really get a lot of hail in the wintertime, but when we've looked at how the forecast is going to play out, we are going to see some of that, some good instability in the upper levels, and that can help drive the possibility for hail. Now, hail's not going to be the primary concern, but don't be surprised maybe if a very strong storm moves over you and you also hear, in addition to the strong winds, you maybe hear some dings outside your house or wherever you may be. So kind of peering into the individual details of these hazards. So basically this is going to be, again, that when that warm front lifts north, that's going to be the increased tornado potential, at least tonight with that warm front. And then as that warm front lifts north, then we're going to be looking at that potential for destructive winds. So what you see here in both of these highlighted images, that's at what we call that a hatched area. So what do those areas define? Well, those hatched areas are where we could see what's called significant severe weather. So in these hatched areas, in the hatched area on the left for tornado potential, that's where we could see the possibility of a strong tornado. That's where the EF2 or higher, if we can get the right things set up to allow that kind of tornado to form. Now, just because we have that hatched area, it doesn't mean all the strong tornadoes are going to be confined to that hatched area. We just want people to look at this as that's where the best probability is tonight and into very early Tuesday morning. Again, this goes through 6 a.m. on Central Time on Tuesday. Now, for the right side of the screen, the hatched area is where we can see where there's a probability, a 10% probability or greater, of at least of the potential for 74 mile per hour wind gusts. So again, it's not the whole area that we're going to see that potential for wind gusts. And for the destructive wind potential, we're likely going to see that materialize. That's looking to our west. It's most likely going to happen more towards Tuesday morning as you get closer to that 6 a.m. window, because by that point, that's when we're going to start to see the squall line starting to take a lot better shape around 6 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday. So this is the question everybody wants to know. When could we possibly see that severe weather with the first round? Well, you can see here in the light blue areas here, that's generally going to be confined along the Panhandle and south of I-10. And we're going to see that mostly after midnight Central Time to 3 a.m. That's when that window is going to happen. And then in those darker blue areas, as you go north, that's when we're going to see the warm front begin to lift north and maybe start to bring a little bit of an increased severe potential for areas like Dothan, Enterprise, southeast Alabama, and maybe as far as the southwest Georgia. But again, as you get further away from the Panhandle, as we showed in this previous image, that's where the probabilities are a little bit lower and things are a little bit more uncertain. So you might not have the highest chance in those areas away from these hatched areas, but you still need to be paying attention tonight. And what kind of impacts, again, could we see with this first round? The damaging winds in excess of 60 to 70 miles per hour in those very strong storms. And that tornado potential, with some of them possibly being strong. So again, this is all in association with the warm front lifting north, and we're going to see likely a little bit higher chance of that tornado compared to damaging wind in the overnight hours. But then we start to see that damaging wind threat really ramp up as the squall line starts to take shape early Tuesday morning. So now we're talking 7 a.m. Tuesday Eastern Time, 6 a.m. Central Time. At this time, we're probably going to start seeing the squall line begin to become a lot better organized across the portions of the Panhandle, southeast Alabama, and maybe even, depending on how fast the speed goes, maybe western portions of the Big Bend along the Apalachicola rivers. So what can we expect with this round? This is where the damaging wind threat is going to be much higher. And what we could see widespread, intense, and possibly a very destructive squall line. Now that's going to depend on how things get organized as it moves through. And what we're also watching for with this line, and we started to see this on some of the higher resolution guidance, is we could see a few storms form ahead of the main line. So maybe these storms would be about an hour or two before the squall line moves through. Those kind of storms, and we're going to show some kind of what we're talking about, those are the storms that could have a little bit better tornado potential because they're going to be out ahead of the main line and they'll have access to better low-level shear that can drive the better tornado potential. So the timing for this round most likely is going to be after 7 a.m. Tuesday. And again, this is going to be the squall line taking better shape. This is where we see the 70 to 80 mile per hour destructive thunderstorm wind gusts possible. And this is where we also could see not only a few tornadoes ahead of the main line, depending on how things shape up, but one of the hardest things to warn for as National Weather Service meteorologists is when we see tornadoes on the actual squall line. The problem with those is oftentimes there's very little warning for those because they're not easy to detect and they can form very rapidly. So especially when that squall line's getting into your area tomorrow morning, you definitely want to be hunkering down. There might not be a tornado warning in place, but again, those tornadoes that form on the squall line, those can form very fast and very rapid. So we want to make sure that even when there's a severe thunderstorm warning, you're taking caution, because even if you don't get a tornado, we're still having that possibility for 70 to 80 mile per hour destructive wind gusts. So again, like we talked about with the overnight severe threat, again, these hatched areas delineate the same thing. But for a lot of the tri-state region, you can see the probabilities are fairly equal with that probability in the hatched areas of seeing an EF2 tornado, which is what we call a strong tornado, or higher. And then for the destructive wind possibility, where everywhere in our area is hatched, that's where you can see why we've been really talking about this event, because we don't get probabilities of severe weather this high this often. So again, that's why we've been kind of ramping up the messaging with the system to make sure folks are taking it seriously. So again, when could this squall line move through? That's the next question a lot of people have been wondering. So generally in southeast Alabama and the Panhandle, we're going to see that squall line knocking on the door 6 a.m., 7 a.m. across those areas Central Time. And then as the squall line becomes mature and starts to move east pretty quickly, we're going to see in those darker blue areas across the Big Bend, the Apalachicola, Flint River basins, generally from 9 a.m. Eastern to 12 noon. And then further east across south central Georgia and the southeast Florida Big Bend in the darker blue areas, generally close to 11 a.m. to 3 o'clock Eastern. So if there's any news that we can be thankful for, it's that this system is going to be moving through pretty quick. So it's not going to be, at least after that first round moves through and the squall line moves through, the severe threat behind the squall line is going to diminish rapidly. Now again, just because the severe threat behind the squall line is going to diminish rapidly, it doesn't mean that the threats are any less. So with this second line, that's where we're going to see that really elevated wind potential, where we see destructive winds possibly as high as 75 miles per hour, and also tornadoes embedded along the line and maybe a few ahead. And again, these tornadoes have access to a lot of low-level shear, more low-level shear than we see in most typical severe weather events. So that's why we've been really advertising that potential for strong tornadoes. Okay, so now that we've talked about the severe threat, which is definitely something we don't want to ignore, which is capturing most people's attention, this is something we don't want people to forget about, and that's what are called non-thunderstorm winds. So as the system moves through, again, like I said, we don't really see severe weather events this strong very often, and so with that, and because of that, we have a very strong low-level wind field with this storm system, and that is going to drive winds very high before the squall line and before that severe weather threat moves in. It's not often we're forecasting sustained winds of 35 to 40 miles per hour along the coast, or across inland areas of 30 and 35 miles per hour. Again, these are sustained winds. And if you look at the gusts, it's even higher. We see gusts across inland portions of the area of 40 to 45, even some areas in southwest Georgia, 50 to 55. And then along the immediate coastline, gusts of 50 to 55 miles per hour, with some areas possibly getting up to 60 miles per hour. And that's before the squall line even moves through. These are wind gusts that we almost never forecast across our forecast area. And that's why we're wanting to make sure folks are paying attention to these forecasts and taking action. So how could this event evolve? So I'm going to let this restart here. And as we go into it starts at around Monday afternoon, basically an hour ago. So what we're looking at is we're going to see these showers start to move into the area. That's ahead of the warm front. And as we get into the evening hours, you see a lot of that rain starts to go inland. And then as we get into midnight, you see some of these isolated cells start to form out ahead in what we call the warm sector by 6 a.m. And then as we get into 8, 9 a.m., you see the squall line starting to take a very strong appearance in these model guides. Now, I want to highlight, this is just a model run of a high-resolution model. There are a whole bunch of high-resolution models that are run. How this severe weather plays out is not going to turn out exactly like this. We're just using this animation to kind of show you the gist of how things are going to fold. So you can see here, again, that early Tuesday morning, you see those storms ahead of the main squall line? That is what we're going to be worried about for that increased tornado potential. And then by the time we get to Tuesday morning, anywhere from that 6 to 8 a.m. window Central Time and Eastern Time, that squall line is going to be maturing, and that's when that destructive winds of 60 to 70 miles per hour and possibly as high as 75 miles per hour in those stronger storms, that's when the destructive wind threat is going to be taking shape. And then, so that's kind of how that severe weather event is going to evolve. And here's the sustained wind. So you can see here, tonight, it's not really going to be the biggest deal, at least for the next few hours. But as we get into Monday evening here, watch as we go from the west and our coastal areas, you can see those sustained winds start to pick up. And then as we get to Tuesday morning, when the warm front's lifted inland and we're about a few hours ahead of the squall line, that is when the strong sustained winds are going to be moving into the area. And again, across the panhandle, sustained winds possibly as high as 25 to 30 miles per hour. Along the coastline, sustained winds possibly of 30 to 40 miles per hour. And that's, again, these are sustained winds. We don't really see sustained winds that high this often. And then if we look at the gust, the same story. So I'll show you when this restarts here. We're not really going to be dealing with the gust too much tonight, or at least in the next few hours or this afternoon and early evening. But then as we get closer to midnight tonight, look at those gusts really start to pick up across southeast Alabama, the immediate coastline. And then as we get into Tuesday morning, 5 a.m., gusts spread all across the forecast area. So again, that is what even though there's a severe weather threat that is very concerning, these winds are nothing to sneeze at. Do not take them lightly. You have a few hours left this afternoon or the rest of this afternoon and evening to clear things out of your yard. Make sure your phones are charged, because these kind of winds can bring power outages. And if your power goes out before the severe weather comes in and your phone's not charged, you might not have a way to get warnings. So again, keep those devices charged right now so you're ready to go in case these winds ahead of the squall line knock out your power. Lastly, what we're talking about at least, and this is associated with the winds, is a coastal flood threat. Now, this is only going to affect areas along the immediate coastline. So looking at across the panhandle, we'll see how this plays out, but what's working in our favor, at least for lower impacts, is that at least west of Apalachicola, a lot of these elevated waters are mostly coming during low tide. So at least along the immediate coastline, folks, in the panhandle, we want them to be ready for 2 to 3 feet of inundation along the immediate coastline. And again, one thing I want to point out is the colors on this graphic do not depict how far the surge will go inland. It's just used to show what areas of the coast could see what. As you get closer to Carabel and other parts of the northern Appalachia Bay and eastern Appalachia Bay, those amounts start to get a little bit higher, and that's because we're seeing that at least the squall line, when it comes through, it will potentially be better, more closer to high tide, and that could bring where we see those higher values of 3 to 4 feet, and maybe even across the eastern Appalachia Bay, folks should be ready for 3 to 5 feet of inundation along the immediate coastline. So we're likely to see these peak water levels again sometime with the high tide on Tuesday afternoon, especially across eastern areas of the Appalachia Bay around Taylor and Dixie County. And even those areas, they could see possibly a second round of coastal flooding, because as the squall line goes through, we're still going to see winds elevated. And as the high tide cycle comes in and the westerly and northwesterly winds come in, eastern portions of the Appalachia Bay could get another round of minor coastal flooding with that second round and second push of winds Tuesday night. So that's something to keep an eye out for. We'll advertise that possibility. We'll keep talking more about it as we get into Tuesday and the squall line moves through. But again, if you live along the immediate coast, be prepared for at least some minor coastal flooding, and then across the Appalachia Bay, you could see a little bit higher coastal flooding of 3 to 5 feet in some areas with that squall, just ahead of the squall line passage on Tuesday. As for rainfall amounts have come down at least a decent amount across the southeast Big Bend, but with the warm front and the rain coming in tonight, and then again along as the squall line starts to take shape, we have seen amounts creep up a little bit across southeast Alabama and the Florida Panhandle. But again, these amounts generally are not going to cause, at least especially across the Big Bend, are not going to cause widespread flooding, but especially in the areas which have poor drainage, we could see some localized flooding, and especially across southeast Alabama where you see the higher amounts, maybe a little bit more localized, a little bit scattered localized flooding. All right, so we'll quickly get some preparedness considerations, and then we'll take a few questions from you guys that have come in throughout the webinar or throughout the briefing. So biggest thing is with that severe weather threat tonight and the possibility of tornadoes, what can you do to prepare? Well, make sure you're keeping your TV tuned to a local station. A lot of broadcast media are helping to get the word out whenever tornadoes are coming out, or whenever tornadoes are developing and tornado warnings are coming out, and other hazards like severe wind gusts. Make sure emergency wireless alerts are on your phone. Okay, we know a lot of people sometimes turn those off because they might get an Amber Alert. But even though you might turn those off, you might accidentally be turning off the alerts that could give you notice of a tornado when we issue a warning. So go through your phone tonight, go through your emergency alert settings, and make sure that you have those enabled. And the best thing you can do is make sure you have a NOAA weather radio that's working. Know where to go. Spend the rest of this afternoon and evening thinking where you're going to go if a tornado warning is issued. The best thing you can do is get to the lowest room of residence and put as many walls between you and the outside as you can. And again, we've been advertising this destructive wind potential with the squall line. So do not take severe thunderstorms for granted. Okay? A lot of times we've seen that severe thunderstorms, which can bring straight line winds, can cause damage similar to a tornado. So that's why, especially with this event, with the very high low-level wind field, you need to take it seriously, okay? Here's some examples here. These were 60 to 70 mile per hour straight line winds, and you can see that the manufactured home on the bottom right was rolled with only 60 to 70 mile per hour straight line winds. Widespread to numerous power outages can occur in 60 to 70 mile per hour winds, as you see here in the bottom left image, with a lot of power lines down. And you can also see some structure damage, even to well-built homes, with siding gone and exposed surfaces possibly causing some damage like that. So again, take this storm seriously, okay? So right now, we'll go ahead and take a few questions that have come in through the broadcast, and then we're going to go ahead and have to turn off the broadcast because we are going to start getting busy, and especially as we get into the evening hours. But we will be posting updates through the overnight hours on our Twitter pages, also known as X, on Facebook, and also and we'll be taking a few questions. So again, if you see severe weather, when it's safe to do so, let us know in those social media channels so we can make a note of it, and your reports do help us improve our warning services. All right, so a few questions. Will it be recorded or rebroadcast? So we have recorded this presentation, and we'll be putting it up on our YouTube page so people can take a look at it later. And it will be available automatically on our Facebook page for viewing. So another question is, are we going to see a lot of lightning and thunder? It's possible that a few of these storms could produce a tornado without much lightning or thunder. And the reason for that is because the intense low-level shear we're seeing, it doesn't take much instability, and instability is what helps produce a lot of lightning and thunder. There's not going to be a whole lot of instability, especially when you compare it to like summertime storms. So, there's the possibility of a few tornadoes forming that might not have any lightning or thunder. But we'll be paying attention. We'll be watching the radar all night, and if we see that potential, we'll be issuing warnings on them. So don't use lightning and thunder to give you an implication of how severe a storm is. So a lot of people say some people say I don't have a basement or an interior room. Where can I take shelter? Well, the best thing to do right now is talk to your friends, talk to somebody who has maybe that kind of shelter or that kind of sturdy structure that you can ride out severe weather in. And maybe this is the kind of event where you reach out to a friend and you say, hey, my home's not the best and sturdy for the kind of destructive winds that they're forecasting. Is there a chance that I will be able to get to your place quickly to hide out if we have severe weather? Again, that's maybe an event where you make sure you keep your phones charged so you can get contact of your loved ones or others very quickly and be able to take shelter quickly like that. And stuff like that. So those are some things you can do. And if you can't do any of those, do the best you can to put as many walls between you and the outside as you possibly can. So somebody asked the question, are bridges going to close? Unfortunately, we don't know that information because we're just focusing on the weather forecast. A lot of those decisions are driven by your local emergency management and your local law enforcement officials. So we encourage wherever you're at, look into the information they're providing and see if they are making decisions on those bridges. someone asked, has our forecaster discussion post been published? So that's basically what we call area forecast discussion. That's where we kind of write about the meteorology and stuff that's going on with this. We typically publish those at 4 a.m. and 4 p.m., so it should already be out there from this afternoon update if you want to view it. And it's available at our website, weather.gov/Tallahassee. So, guys, that's about all we have right now. We're going to be here all night. We are, as the National Weather Service, we are staffed 365 days and 24/7 of those days. So we're going to be checking out this weather. We're going to be issuing warnings if need be, and we're going to keep an eye on this system all the way all the way from now until it moves through on Tuesday. So thanks for tuning in, you guys, and keep an eye on our social media channels for updates. And just to give you a quick update, a quick idea how we typically provide updates. On Facebook, we typically provide updates that are more broad and give a synopsis of if there's any watches issued and provide radar updates. For more frequent updates, maybe of things going on just immediately, we do put a little bit more updates on our Twitter or X channel when things happen during the severe weather event. So again, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and thank you, and stay safe with this event and take the weather forecast seriously.